Stand on the Tyne Bridge today, and you can see the entire sweep of Newcastle stretched below, steel arches, Victorian terraces, and the ancient castle keep rising above the river. Over 300,000 people call this city home, and another 250,000 live in the surrounding boroughs that form Tyneside. But rewind 2,000 years, and you would have found a wooden Roman fort on a limestone bluff, guarding the empire's northernmost frontier against the Pictish tribes. Conquest. Coal. Steel. Shipyards. Using cutting-edge AI reconstruction, we are about to walk you through every century of Newcastle's story, from the Roman wall builders to the football crowds that fill St. James's Park today. The Romans arrived at the River Tyne around 122 AD, the year Emperor Hadrian ordered the construction of his wall across northern Britain. They built Pons Aelius, the Bridge of Aelius, named for Hadrian's family name. The fort itself stood on the north bank, a rectangular stone structure housing 500 auxiliary troops drawn from Gaul and the Rhineland. Archaeological excavations beneath the railway arches and medieval streets have uncovered barrack blocks, granaries, and a commanding officer's house with underfloor heating. The bridge's stone piers supported a wooden deck wide enough for 2 carts to pass. For nearly 3 centuries, Pons Aelius anchored the eastern end of Hadrian's Wall, a military supply depot where grain from the fertile river valleys moved north to feed the garrisons. Civilian settlements, the vicus, sprawled south of the river, where potters, blacksmiths, and tavern keepers served the soldiers. Inscriptions recovered from the site record dedications to Jupiter, Mithras, and the goddess Coventina. By the early 5th century, Roman administration collapsed. The legions withdrew, the bridge timbers rotted, and the fort fell silent. For 400 years, the Tyne crossing became a ghost site, crumbling walls, empty gateways, and the memory of an empire that had stretched from Scotland to the Sahara. The name Newcastle first appears in 1080, the year Robert Curthose, eldest son of William the Conqueror, built a wooden Motte and Bailey fortress on the old Roman site. The Normans had subdued southern England, but the north remained hostile. Saxon lords, Scottish raiders, and Danish fleets still contested the region. Robert's Newcastle commanded the lowest bridging point on the Tyne, controlling trade and military movement between England and Scotland. 50 years later, Henry II replaced the wooden palisade with stone. The keep that dominates Newcastle's skyline today was constructed between 1172 and 1177 under the direction of Maurice the Engineer, the king's master mason. It rises 90 feet, with walls 14 feet thick at the base. The Great Hall on the second floor could host 200 knights. A chapel occupied the third floor, its Norman arches still intact. A well shaft descends 99 feet through solid rock to reach the water table. By 1216, King John had added a massive curtain wall enclosing 38 acres, the largest urban fortification in northern England. 6 gates punctured the wall: West Gate, Newgate, Pilgrim Gate, Close Gate, Sand Gate, and Pandon Gate. Each gate was a fortress in itself, with portcullis, murder holes, and guard towers. The wall defined Newcastle's shape for the next 5 centuries. Inside, merchants built stone houses with tile roofs. The quayside became a forest of masts, wool, hides, and grain went south, wine, cloth, and iron came north. By 1300, Newcastle held royal charters for markets, fairs, and self-government. A mayor and council of burgesses ruled the town, collecting tolls and dispensing justice in the Guildhall. In 1239, Henry III granted Newcastle a monopoly on all coal exports from the River Tyne. It was the beginning of a trade that would define the city for 700 years. Coal had been mined in shallow bell pits since Roman times, but the medieval demand, London's hearths, blacksmiths' forges, lime kilns for mortar, turned it into an industry. By 1350, Newcastle's coal was fueling the capital. The phrase "taking coals to Newcastle's" had become a byword for pointless effort by Shakespeare's time. The city exported everything, imported nothing in that line. The hostmen of Newcastle, a cartel of merchant families, controlled every aspect of the trade. They owned the keelboats, flat-bottomed barges that carried coal from riverside staiths to deep-water colliers anchored in the estuary. They fixed prices, licensed dealers, and crushed competitors. Membership in the Hostman's Company was hereditary, passed from father to son along with coal rights and wharves. By 1600, Newcastle shipped 200,000 tons of coal annually. The city's wealth funded stone bridges, almshouses, and the soaring Gothic church of St. Nicholas, which became the cathedral in 1882. But prosperity brought conflict. During the English Civil War, Newcastle declared for King Charles. A Scottish Covenanter army besieged the city in 1644. For 3 months, the defenders held the medieval walls while cannonballs shattered the keeps and gatehouses. When the walls were finally breached, the Scots occupied Newcastle and cut off London's coal supply. The capital froze through 2 winters until Parliament negotiated terms. After the Restoration, Charles II rewarded Newcastle's loyalty with expanded charters, and the coal trade resumed its climb. By 1700, the city's population had reached 16,000, making it the 4th largest in England outside London. Keelmen, the bargemen who moved coal from pit to ship, formed their own guild, with distinctive costumes, rituals, and a hospital for injured workers. Their labor songs echoed across the Tyne at dawn and dusk, marking the rhythm of the city's working day. In 1814, George Stephenson, a colliery engineer from Wylam, built his first locomotive, Blutcher, to haul coal wagons at Killingworth. 11 years later, he opened the Stockton and Darlington Railway, the world's first public steam railway. Newcastle became the cradle of the railway age. Robert Stephenson and Company, founded by George and his son Robert in 1823, built locomotives in their works on 4th Street. Rocket, the engine that won the Rainhill trials in 1829 and set the template for modern steam power, was designed and fabricated in Newcastle. By mid-century, the city exported locomotives to Russia, India, and South America. Shipbuilding followed. The first iron-hulled vessels slid down Tyneside slipways in the 1840s. Charles Palmer opened his yard at Jarrow in 1852, specializing in screw-driven colliers and warships. William Armstrong, a hydraulics engineer turned arms manufacturer, established his Elswick works in 1847 on a loop of the Tyne west of the city. Armstrong's factory became the largest privately owned armaments complex in the world, employing 25,000 workers at its peak. It produced hydraulic cranes, rifled artillery, and warships. The cruiser HMS Esmeralda, built for Chile in 1883, set new standards for speed and firepower. Elswick guns armed the fortresses of the British Empire and the fleets of a dozen foreign navies. The population exploded. In 1801, Newcastle held 28,000 people. By 1901, it was 215,000. Terraced housing spread east toward Byker and west toward Benwell, endless rows of 2-up 2-down brick houses built back-to-back with shared yards and outdoor privies. Public health collapsed under the weight. Cholera outbreaks struck in 1831, 1849, and 1853. Infant mortality in the slums reached 200 deaths per 1,000 births. Reformers like Dr. George Richardson documented the squalor and lobbied for clean water and sewerage. The Newcastle and Gateshead Water Company completed a reservoir system in the 1860s, and Joseph Bazalgette-style saws followed in the 1870s. Victorian Newcastle was smoke, noise, and iron, a city that built the tools of empire and paid the price in its workers' lungs. The First World War turned Tyneside into a fortress of production. Armstrong Whitworth built monitors, cruisers, and the battleship HMS Ramillies. Swan Hunter at Wallsend launched destroyers at the rate of 1 per month. 30,000 men worked in the shipyards, another 20,000 in munitions. Zeppelin raids in 1915 killed 18 people and revealed the vulnerability of industrial cities to air attack. The interwar years brought catastrophe. Global overcapacity in shipbuilding, the collapse of coal exports, and the Great Depression gutted Tyneside's economy. By 1933, unemployment in Newcastle reached 30%. Jarrow, 6 miles east, saw 70% of its workforce idle after Palmer's yard closed. The Jarrow March of 1936, 200 men walking to London to petition Parliament, became a symbol of northern despair. The Second World War revived the yards. Swan Hunter built the aircraft carrier HMS Victorious and dozens of corvettes for Atlantic convoy duty. German bombers targeted the Tyne in 1941, dropping incendiaries that destroyed medieval churches and Georgian terraces. 400 civilians died in the raids. Post-war reconstruction brought modernist planning, tower blocks replaced slums, the Tyne Bridge became an icon, and the Metro Centre in Gateshead opened in 1986 as Europe's largest shopping mall. But shipbuilding declined. Swan Hunter launched its last vessel in 2006. Armstrong's Elswick works closed in stages, the final demolition completed in 2010. Coal mining ended in the 1980s, the last pit at Ellington shutting in 2005. Newcastle had to reinvent itself. The quayside, once choked with coal dust and keelboats, became a promenade of galleries and restaurants in the 1990s. The Baltic Centre for Contemporary Art opened in 2002 in a converted flour mill. The Sage Gateshead, a curved glass concert hall designed by Norman Foster, followed in 2004. The Millennium Bridge, a tilting pedestrian span, links the two. Newcastle University and Northumbria University enroll 60,000 students, transforming the city into a centre of research in marine engineering, renewable energy, and medical science. The Life Sciences cluster around the Centre for Life employs 2,000 researchers. St James Park, home of Newcastle United, fills with 52,000 fans on match days, a tribe united by black and white stripes and a loyalty that survives decades without silverware. The Great North Run, a half-marathon from Newcastle to South Shields, attracts 60,000 runners each September, the largest such event in the world. Grey Street, built in the 1830s and named the finest street in England by John Betjeman, curves downhill past Victorian facade still intact. The Theatre Royal stages opera and ballet. The Literary and Philosophical Society, founded in 1793, maintains a library of 200,000 volumes in its neoclassical hall. Newcastle's dialect, Geordie, persists in the shipyard slang, the folk songs, and the voices in the big market on Saturday nights. Stand on the high-level bridge at dusk today, and you can trace Newcastle's entire history in a single glance: the Norman Keep, the Victorian railway arches, the glass towers of the business district, and the shipyard cranes still standing at Wallsend like monuments to a vanished age. The coal that built this city is gone, the yards are silent, but the Tyne still flows beneath 7 bridges, and the city still rises from its banks with the stubborn vitality that carried it from Roman fort to industrial titan to modern metropolis. A city that refused to die. Newcastle endures.